Technology is not just a happenstance, and not just something that got there when nobody was noticing. And so we are responsible for our technologies and the effects of our technologies, as we are responsible for tidying up our grammar or shaping any situation. So it does point to the possibility of ecology. When you know the effects of a medium, then you can take steps to shape those effects or to restrict them, so on.
This is a mathematically decent representation of the need for fair evolution of current cultivation.
Licensing agreements.
That they couldn't license content because their hands were tied with artist contracts and publisher agreements.
Sunk Napster, and Steve Jobs, as a result of his...
could foresee their potential.
Why did record executives whoosh into deals with Apple?
An unexpected visitor to Lucasfilm was Steve Jobs.
Executives from major labels had told pre-iTunes digital music services, including Napster and Reel, that they couldn't license content because their hands were tied with artist contracts and publisher agreements. There are a number of theories as to how Apple cut through all that. One, the previous models that labels had discussed were subscriptions.
David and I just said that we appreciate it so much on that service. And so, unfortunately, the record labels are not making the greatest deals for the artists.
Based on two things and two things only. One, how vocal the creators are, and two, the options available to creators. They will back down. They will change it.
The greatest
it is guaranteed.
Deals for.
If we're here a year from now, they will absolutely be taking 30%. I guarantee you that. And if you don't believe it, the truth is a lot of people have that deal right now. And many other people have historical legacy deals that give them a better percentage than you. Vivo has a better deal than you. So Google and YouTube taking this position that we don't do better deals is completely false.
Pandora is considered a non-interactive service, which means it's licensed more like a broadcaster. And this allows them to operate under a so-called statutory license, which lets them play pretty much whatever they want, as long as they compensate the performers and the labels within a negotiated rate that's based on what a trio of federal judges decides is fair.
They do give better deals. They just don't give them to you.
What a trio of federal judges decides is fair.
They just don't give them to you.
It's important to note that regular over-the-air radio in America does not pay performers or labels a dime, which in my opinion is ridiculous given that the rest of the world does, but that's a different story.
If they value Vivo above iJustine, if they value Discovery Channel and Vision 3 above...
Then it's up to Spotify how to divvy it up, and Spotify is in fact secretive about how it's divvied up. We don't know what the top artists are getting as opposed to the rest of us, because we never got to even negotiate with the company.
Or whoever. Just think about what that means. That means the native artists on YouTube get a worse deal than Rihanna.
But Spotify, to come into the U.S. market, it started in Europe. They needed access to the music, and most of the music, just by sheer quantity, is held by major labels, and the major labels, there are only a few of them. So they needed their cooperation to enter the U.S. market without being considered a pirate website, like Napster was originally.
Yep.
And what they did, the way they convinced the labels, was not to offer them powerful royalty share. They gave them 18% ownership of the company. So the major labels are stockholders in Spotify. In exchange, the labels accepted whatever royalty they accepted. They have not made that public information. The rest of us, who aren't represented by major labels, were presented with take it or leave it.
What does that say to you about how YouTube thinks? The only reason they cave with Vivo is because they have no choice, because Facebook is offering a better deal to Vivo or other competitors. But because the individuals in the YouTube ecosystem, the channel providers, are so passionate about YouTube and so enthusiastic about it, and because they're fragmented, they don't present a hardcore negotiating front, but you could.
And perhaps, and it's always been thus. The major artists, if you're Metallica or Lady Gaga or Adele or whatever, you're actually starting to make some okay money off of a Spotify. Like I interviewed a prominent music business attorney who represents major artists. When I first talked to him about Spotify a year ago, I said, what are the royalty payments like? And he said, Lunch used to be breakfast.
U.S. District Court judge denied the RIAA's request for a temporary injunction against the Rio. They were just shocked when they lost, Watkins says. They had never lost a case before. In October 1999, Diamond sold 200,000 copies of the Rio PMP 300 after that. Meanwhile, over at rapidly recovering Apple Computer, Steve Jobs' latest idea was the digital hub strategy, where the Mac was the center of your lifestyle, as the company's hardware chief, Jonathan Rubinstein, recalls. Digital Hub integrated a number of hip, entertainment-oriented ideas, like iMovie and iPhoto. Called Diamond Multimedia the next day about designing hardware to interface between the Rio player and the Macintosh. And the iPod iTunes system was initially incompatible with Windows. Our smaller market share
turned out to be an asset, Jobs said in the perfect thing. We only convinced them to let us do it on the Mac at first. We said, well, if, the virus gets out, it's only going to pollute 5% of the garden here. And that's probably what, in the end, enabled us to get them to come along with us. Doug Morris, who runs...
John came up with the idea of doing this story from a toy's point of view, done in this 3D plastic world.
Find the one investor who...
in most things, you need a hero and you need a villain.
Having Hollywood's ear because he was the funder of Pixar to work.
Steve was an investor at that time and had a much longer term view than your average venture capitalist would have had about our young company.
It's on a hard drive, that could be films either, but it's basically every song ever made can be stored on $400 worth of storage by 2008. It takes that entire element, the physical element of songs off the table. And you've seen the numbers. I mean,
So what? If computers can do it better than us, then what's the difference? It's machines talking to other machines.
The music industry is imploding in front of our very eyes. And Hollywood's worried as well. They're facing a force that they haven't faced before.
Spotify argument, the way they would respond to things like Damon's essay, and just take this with what you will, I'm just being devil's advocate, is they would say, well, we're still kind of at the beginning of our service. As we grow, we'll start to make more and more, we'll have many, many more streams and be able to pay out more and more money to artists.
And Steve, how do they come up with the math so that they send a check to Damon then for 21 cents? How does that all come about?
One of the things that needs to happen here is scale. What we need to do is scale from 3 million to 20 million or 50 million. Not necessarily across one service. It could be across many services. But achieving that kind of scale will help address some of these arguments about, it was 21 cents here or 31 cents there.
Stephen Marks, again, Chief of Digital Business and General Counsel for the Recording Industry Association of America, represents the major labels in Washington, D.C. Let me go quickly back, and very quickly.
And the response is draconian and not necessarily the one that's going to get them out of this. And finally, I'll give you one last example of free, perhaps the most powerful of all.
I want to imagine a world in a couple of years when we get into our car and every one of our dashboards has whatever flavor you like, whether it's
Spotify and other services like Rhapsody, RDO, and MOG. Now, there is no statutory license for on-demand listening platforms, and these services operate more like Netflix, which means that the services need to...
In most cases, in the case of Spotify or RDO or MOG or those kinds of companies, the streaming subscription companies, they pay the record labels up front, sometimes many tens of millions of dollars.
It was a very cool project. I built the whole thing on Next.
Next Computers, Steve Jobs' computer company when he got kicked out. Computers, Steve Jobs' computer company when he got kicked out of
I'll show you
Apple. Oh, wow, you have a Next tattoo. That is awesome. Has Steve Jobs ever seen that?
I don't think he's seen it.
Wait, put that back up for a second. We got to get that on camera.
Walt Mossberg.
Look right there. That is God damn, I almost feel like we should get a freestanding I'm going to look at it. That is awesome.
Circa 1991, that tattoo is my first tattoo.
I mean, if you have an Apple, you don't have an Apple computer company when you got kicked out.
I don't have an Apple tattoo.
Right,
that's better than an Apple tattoo.
I was about to say,
having an
in order for the right to use their catalogs, for the right to stream all that great music, that
Spotify, Pandora, or some other service, and we're either paying a fee or there's sufficient advertising revenue so that we can listen to that music when we drive to work every day. But imagine when we go from just a few million super fans listening to Spotify to everybody on the 405 or Long Island Expressway engaging. I think you're going to, we're looking towards a different world. Just like 20 years ago when everybody bought CDs.
I mentioned fiber optics. Their abundancy tends to make things
how to make money, and therefore would listen when he called.